Welcome, everyone. We're just going to let everyone log in, get a little settled, and we'll get started in just a second. Alrighty. If everyone trickles in, I'll include the most important information in the chat feature, so if there's anything you missed, it'll be there. But I'm just going to get started. Thank you to everyone for coming out virtually tonight. I'm Gracie, I'm the events coordinator for print. And just a few housekeeping details before we get started. Microphones and videos are off, as we found it just tends to help with internet connectivity issues. So thanks for bearing with us on that. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat box or in the Q&A function, and we'll go through them right after the discussion. If you'd like a copy of Codename Madeline, I will include the link to the print page in the chat box as a special promotion that we're very excited about. Each copy purchased from us for this event will include a signed book plate as well as a secret message that you can decode. So you can live your own spy life at home. And now for our speakers. Elaine Weiss is an award-winning journalist and the author of The Woman's Hour, The Great Fight to Win the Vote. Arthur G. Magida is an award-winning journalist and the author of Codename Madeline, The Nazi Seance, and The Rabbi and the Hitman, and he lives in Baltimore, Maryland. So please join me in virtually welcoming Elaine Weiss and Arthur Magida.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Arthur.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, and congratulations on publication of Codename Madeline, and this fascinating, complicated story, which is really 3/4 of a century old now. How did you come to find the story? And then what made you want to write about Noor?
Thank you, Elaine. And first, I would like to tell everybody in our vast Zoomed audience, I will call you Zoomers, that Elaine and I both live in Baltimore.
Yes, we do.
She's about 5-6 blocks away from me. Thanks to social distancing, we're staying far away from each other. But thanks to modern technology, we can talk and wave to each other right now, and you are all witnessing this phenomenon of two Mount Washingtonians waving and talking and conversing about my book. How did I hear about Noor, learn about Noor, what pulled me to Noor? Noor came to me. Noor was, like most things in life, this was an accident. I was minding my own business. I don't do that very often. And one day, I believe it was in the year 2014, I got an email from friends who make documentaries. They were announcing a new documentary they had made for PBS. It was going to air in another 2 or 3 weeks. It was called Enemy of the Reich. Whenever I hear the word Reich, I perk up just a little bit because I'm intrigued by the Third Reich. So I read the statement that they were sending me. And this movie was about Noor Inayat Khan, new name to me. Her father was Hazrat Inayat Khan. That was not a new name to me. I was very familiar with Hazrat Inayat Khan. He was a very influential, very pioneering Sufi who came from India in 1910, essentially to teach Sufism in the West. And the more I read about Noor in this 1 or 2 page statement, the more intrigued I was. It made no sense for Noor Inayat Khan, the daughter of an illustrious mystic, to become a secret agent for the British in occupied Paris during the Second World War. Frankly, even before I finished reading the release, and before I even saw the movie, I arranged for the university where I was teaching to screen this movie. And I arranged for a Holocaust scholar and a Third Reich scholar, a German scholar, and one of the producers in the film to participate in a panel discussion with me after the screening. To prepare for that, I had to learn a lot about Noor. And the more I read, the more I concluded Noor deserves a very good book. I wanted to write a good book about Noor.
Wow. Then how do you go about that? because I'm someone who inhabits the endnotes of nonfiction narrative books. And so I certainly took a stroll through your endnotes, and there's a huge amount of research, a huge amount of unpublished documents and war information records. How did you go about researching so deeply?
The secret, as you may know, I mean, you write books, the secret is vitamins. The secret also is really good shoes. The secret also is unrelenting curiosity that sends you to bed very late at night and wakes you up very early in the morning. That's the essence of any good research. But one of the very, very first things I did was contact Noor's nephew, who's also a Sufi master and teacher, just like his father was. He was then living in upstate New York. There was a Sufi retreat center there. I emailed him. He agreed to get together with me. I needed to learn about Sufism. I needed to at least learn the basics of Noor, the basics of her story. But about a week before I drove up to New Lebanon, I sent him an email. I was very curious if he knew of any Sufi teachings, any teachings that may have sustained Noor when she was in a horrible German prison for 10 months. This would have been November 43 to September 44. She was chained, she was in solitary, she could not see anybody, talk to anybody. How do you retain your sanity, your sense of decency, your sense of spirituality, your sense of self in those conditions? Well, he sent me a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, which he had heard had helped Noor. And I have a copy of the Bhagavad Gita also, just like him. This one is a translation by a very esteemed Oxford Don. I wanted to see how the two versions compared, what he sent me, what I had on my own shelf. So I flipped through this Bhagavad Gita. I finally found the verse that had come from Persia. And it was rather odd. I had not opened my Gita for 25, 30 years. 25, 30 years ago, I had marked with brackets only one verse in this Gita.
Wow. That's spooky.
It gets slightly better. So I took this up to New Lebanon with me. Halfway through the 3-hour interview, I pulled it out of my backpack. Once again, I flipped through, trying to find the page, the verse. I did. This time I noticed that not only had I put brackets around the verse, but I had also written in the margin, selfless work, work for others, which is what Noor was always engaged in and what this verse was about. Selfless work equals liberty. Then I handed it to Persia, and he almost shrugged and said, well, of course, because Noor's last word at Dachau, where she was killed, was liberty. So that was the beginning of my research.
Wow, that's spiritual in its own way, isn't it?
Yes.
Did you feel truly drawn that there was something, I won't go as so far as to say mystical, but was there something more than just an author looking for a good book subject in this?
At the outset, yes. As I said, it came to me. That's great. Almost every book idea I've had has come to me. I have not sought it. But the more time I spent with this book, the more time I spent with Noor, I began to believe I was spending time with Noor. And she began to have profound effects on me. I realized what a laggard I am. I realized how, one of my daughters is listening, I will castigate myself and she would appreciate this. I realize sometimes how insensitive I am, how ungiving I am. I became very critical of me because of Noor. At one point, I remember, I had done recommended to somebody that she do something that I thought was in her best interest. She didn't do it. And I was very offended. It would have helped her. I have some years on her. I know how she should proceed with her life. I didn't talk to this person for 2 or 3 days. And then I remembered an incident that I write about in the book. At one point in 43, while Noor was in Paris and the Gestapo was after her and getting closer and closer, one of her resistance friends supposedly had almost betrayed her to the Germans. And the other members of the resistance kept criticizing this guy and telling Noor, he betrayed you. Don't you say anything to him. Don't you get close to him. And Noor kept saying, we must not judge him. We cannot judge. Knowing that, I forgave my friend, who of course would not listen to me because I always know best. So yeah, it had a profound effect on me. And I've heard from a few readers, it's had a profound effect on other people as well.
Wow, that's inspiring. Were there surprises when you began the research? You know, you begin with Sufism, and one of your challenges, I imagine, was absorbing enough of this rather esoteric philosophy and religious discipline, and having to understand it well enough to explain to your readers how fundamental this was to Noor's life and even her work in the war.
Yeah, I had to immerse myself in Sufism. I had a brushing knowledge of it. I know a fair amount about a number of religions and a number of mysticisms because I've been pulled to that for years and decades, in fact. But I had to learn how Hazrat Inayat Khan, Noor's father, taught Sufism in the West, how he broadened it and made it, in effect, more ecumenical and more universal. I had to learn how that was slightly different than what he had learned back in India. At the same time, while talking about all this in the book, I had to speak to a very broad audience. I was not writing a theological text. Neither my editor, nor Norton, my publisher, nor my readers, nor I would have tolerated that. So I had to figure out some way to occasionally refer to Sufism, never once going into too much depth, but hopefully by the end of the book, the accretion of all these mystical dollops and references have taught people what Sufism is. And one of the extraordinary things about dealing with Hazrat Inayat Khan is he was a phenomenal writer. He was terrific at writing aphorisms. I have some right here. Ecologists in the audience will like this. The trees of the forest silently await God's blessing. The giver is greater than the gift. Sleep is comfortable, but awakening is interesting. It was so difficult not to keep quoting Hazrat Inayat Khan. The man is eminently quotable. But other research, other surprises, yeah. Along the way, I accumulated letters that Noor's father had sent her from around 1916 to 1927. In fact, somewhere, I have one right here. This he sent to her in 1917. Noor and her mother were then living in London. He was up north performing the music to raise money for the troops, and he wrote to Noor something that I never would have written to my children. Do you ask Allah to keep me safe so the Zeppelins may not drop bombs on me? Yeah, we all want our children to think about us, but I would never impose a burden like that on my kids. This is only 2 sentences. The next sentence, basically, he asked Noor to let her little brother play with her toys. Now that I understand, but I would never ask my kids to pray so bombs would not drop on me. So getting those letters, and I have about 15, 20 of them, was very illuminating. I have letters that Noor sent Azim, who was her fiance in the 30s for about 6 years. Fascinating thing about those is that Noor's family was very opposed to the engagement. That's one reason it went on for so long. And to this day, Noor's 90-year-old cousin, who I interviewed probably about 7 hours, refuses to believe that these two were even engaged. Believe me, from the way Noor expresses herself in these letters, they were engaged and she was passionately in love with him. I read that Noor met with 2 Gestapo agents, although she did not know they were Gestapo agents. It was a setup. This was a Paris cafe called Le Colisee, C-O-L-I-S-E-E. Well, I let that sit in my head for a couple of days, and then I remembered that I have a book of color photos that were taken in Paris during the occupation by a collaborator. Basically, it was to show how wonderful Paris is under the Germans. And there was a 2-page spread in there of a photo of Le Colisee. The name is written in lights above the door. I don't know how I remember that. People are mothers are pushing strollers by. Germans are sitting at tables out front. The French are trying to ignore the Germans as much as possible. That gave me a great sense of what that cafe was like, and I was able to give some details of it in my book. One or two others. I read that Noor Inayat Khan and his brothers had performed music in Moscow, where Noor was born, in 1913, 1914. And the name of the cafe, the club, was Maxim. So I did some research on Maxim. Turns out that the owner of Maxim was an African American. He was the son of slaves from Mississippi.
I remember that in the book.
Yeah. And the idea of an African American son of former slaves who had split from his mother, life was too horrible down there, worked in various hotels, restaurants throughout the United States, then in Europe, then finally ends up in Moscow, and owns a club where Noor Inayat Khan performs. It was just mind-blowing. These things are not supposed to happen in real life. It happened in this life. Can I give you, I was thinking earlier about great little stories. And then we'll move on to other things. In August 43, Noor met with a member of the Resistance. He was just a few years older than her, but he was kind of taking her under his wing. And in fact, this is where they met. This is a restaurant cafe in Paris. It exists to this day. Right about here, if this was larger, you would see a statue of the King of Beer way up at the top. Still to this day, there is a stork next to the chimney. Well, Pierre Vianot had planned a morning meeting with Noor. Noor kept falling asleep during the meeting. He felt sorry for Noor. She was wiped out. He said, Noor, let's go to a nearby hotel. You need some rest. So we went to the hotel. Noor crashed in the bed. Pierre Vianot sat in a chair on the other side of the room. She finally woke up. She was ready to go to work. About to leave the room, Noor looks around and she says, no, this is too neat. We need to mess this up so they will think that some hanky-panky went on. She was very clever and very resourceful.
She was indeed. And it was so fascinating. She's also, she can be very, very clever, as you say, and worldly. And then on the other hand, she's very otherworldly. She's mystical in her own way. And she's esoteric in her own way. And as you're reading your very vivid descriptions of her training in the the special agent training that she undergoes in the SOE in England, you do at several points, and I think you as an author also question whether she's kind of cut out for this. Do you think that she should have taken on this role? Was she equipped for it? Was she good?
Well, looking back, yes, she was a superb agent, placing myself in what was going on in the first half of 43 when she was being trained. If I had encountered Noor, I may have had second thoughts about her. As you said, she was fairly ethereal. She was very esoteric. She was rooted and grounded in this mysticism that nobody in the SOE knew anything about. A member of her training group said, she was also not right because she was so beautiful. And once you would see Noor, you would never forget about Noor. And that's not the best quality for a secret agent. And another reason why maybe looking back, perhaps she was not right at the outset, was that shortly before her father died in 1927, he laid down what he called the Code of Chivalry. And Noor lived by these. These were her creed. Could you imagine a secret agent going into Europe, June 43, and this is her creed? Of course, do not neglect those who depend upon you. That's good for an agent. Do not spare yourself in the work which you must accomplish. Any agent should do that. But bear no malice against your worst enemy. I could not have gone up against the Germans and borne no malice. Elsewhere, I can't find it right now. She was also taught by her father to always observe the truth and uphold truth and never to lie. Truth, he said, is all the religion there is. A secret agent committed to truth who could not tell a lie, I wrote somewhere in my book, perhaps would be a dead dud of an agent. You have to lie, and Noor never lied. Even after the Germans caught her in October 43 and they put her for 6 weeks in a prison in the center of Paris, she did not lie. And in fact, somewhere, I can't find it, I have a photo of that prison. We'll let that go for right now. But she tried to escape twice. This is 84 Avenue Foch. The first time was shortly after they caught her, took her to that prison. They took her up to the 5th floor, interrogated her rather gently by Nazi standards. It was apparent they were not going to get anywhere with her. She did not tell them anything useful. She barely said a word. Finally, they were ready to take her to her cell on the 5th floor. She asked if she could use the ladies' room. They pointed to it at the end of the hall. She said she went in there. She was about to close the door entirely, but the German said, no, you must keep that brick in place. We like to see what people are doing. Noor, being very modest and also very strategic, she had a plan, insisted they remove the brick. They did. She was in there for quite a while. Finally, Gestapo agent opened a window just a little bit further down on that 5th floor. He looked out, and there's Noor balancing on the rain gutter 5 floors up, trying to escape. He talked her back in. But about 5-6 weeks later, Noor and 2 other guys escaped, this time through the roof. And through a series of balconies and ropes, they got down to the street. They were caught maybe 10, 15 minutes later. The head of 84 Avenue Foch and gave them a choice. They could each promise that they would never try to escape again. They made that promise, they could stay there. They didn't promise they would be sent to prisons in Germany. One guy made that promise. He stayed in that prison, 84th Avenue, fought for the rest of the war, and he survived. Noor, who had been trained to always tell the truth, could not fib. And that refusal, in a sense, cost her her life. The next day, she was taken by train to Pforzheim, Germany. She spent 10 months in Pforzheim in shackles. Her wrists were shackled together. Her ankles were shackled together. There was a chain between the lower chain and the top chain, and she was in solitary. And she learned a lot about solitude. She'd written about the value of solitude before, and perhaps also while she was in this prison, that verse from the Bhagavad Gita helped her.
Yeah.
Speculation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the fascinating things is you do take us into the mind of, as much as possible, of Noor, of what her training, what her discipline, what her spirituality might have, how it might have sustained her in this time. You also bring us into the minds of several Gestapo and SS agents who encounter Noor and admire her. And I found that very fascinating. Before, you know, as you explain, they capture her radio. She's that's her job, to send these radio transmissions of information back to London, and they confiscate it while she's in prison. And they do perhaps my favorite word in your entire book, the Funkspiel. They do the radio play, this game. They take over her persona, or they try to, and they try to misdirect the both London, which is organizing resistance efforts, and even the agents in France. So you get into the minds of her opponents. And that was a fascinating thing for me. How were you able to do that?
Vitamins, it all comes back to vitamins. Whole Foods isn't that far away. I blew a fortune on vitamins. Those of you who have not acquired my book, or those of you who don't know too much about SOE history, Special Operations Executive, this is, if I can hold this up somewhere, this is the sort of radio Noor was using to transmit messages back to London. Within this suitcase, there's a transmitter, there's a headset, there's a receiver. This thing weighed 30 pounds. Noor lugged a 30-pound radio throughout Paris for about 4 months. Just that fact alone, I hope, would have given the Germans a lot of respect for her. But yes, I attempted to get into the heads of some of these Germans who got to know Noor, who interrogated Noor, who in the end, as you said, respected Noor. And one of the ways I did that was by acquiring a very, very rare manuscript, which is essentially an interrogation with the guy who interrogated Noor. And this occurred 1 or 2 years after the war itself. He said that knowing Noor gave him an appreciation and a certainty for the afterlife. Knowing Noor, seeing how she conducted herself all the time that she was at 84 Avenue, thought she did not see her after she was sent to Germany, gave him a respect for the human spirit. He did not become a Sufi, but he respected humans greatly, and made him much more humble than he had been before or during the war. So the effect she had on people is really astounding.
Were there any parts of this that were really hard to write for you, that either were difficult to wrap your head around or emotionally difficult? I mean, this is a young woman. She's barely 30 years old when she dies. It's a riveting story, but it's also a sad story. So were there parts of this which you found particularly easy or hard to write?
Easy, you're right. It's never easy. Hard, start to finish. Harder in spots, yes. At one point, I had to write just a little bit about Winston Churchill, because he's the guy who created the SOE. Mm-hmm. And for 2 or 3 days, I was stumped. First of all, who am I to write about Winston Churchill? You know, the greats of our century and the previous century have written about Churchill, and Churchill himself wrote about himself. I didn't know what to say, but finally, after 2 or 3 days, I knew I had to start writing something because the clock was ticking, and that's why I wrote. He was cranky, crusty, and cantankerous. And those 3 C's came to me literally in the middle of the night. Mm-hmm. A lot of good stuff happens to me in the middle of the night. I can stay awake all the time. Always was and always would be, with no apologies for his ways or his fondness for alcohol, morning, afternoon, or night, or his rudeness that didn't distinguish between friend or foe, family or heel. And now that his years in the wilderness, as he called them, were over, Winston Churchill was in fine fettle. So I go on in that vein for another 2 paragraphs. So coming to terms with Winston Churchill was hard. Of course, I knew from the very beginning what Noor's fate would be. That was the most difficult part of the book to write. There are 4 different stories about what may have happened to Noor when she was taken from Forsyth Prison down to Dachau. Frankly, I'm not sure which one to believe, which is why I tell all 4. Yeah. But it was excruciating to tell each one. And it was excruciating also with some of them to give the Germans advantage for what was happening to Noor. And yeah, I knew as I was getting closer to writing to that part of the book, what I would have to confront. When I started writing it, I was in tears. Mm. And as Gracie said before, I've written other books. I don't cry when I write books. I cried when I wrote this book. It was very difficult. Yeah. And that was, I think, in this 2nd chapter from the very end. After that, there's an epilogue. And that was slightly difficult, too, because I talk about how people now perceive it. Mm-hmm. But writing in detail about her death after all the time that she and I had spent together and all the time that she had enriched my life, probably the most difficult writing assignment I ever had.
Well, with good reason, and you do it quite beautifully. So even when you get to that point in the story, I think the reader feels that emotion and feels that they were able to observe a very special life. Not your ordinary spy story. Let's put it that way. In fact, there have been quite a few books lately about women spies. I like women's history myself, but how would you say, a reader who's read some of these, how does Noor's story differ? What would you tell them they will gain from your book that will add to their understanding?
Okay, first, I would like to pause and get away from me just for a moment. You just said you like women's stories. Certainly Noor's is a woman's story. But everybody should know they are listening to a New York Times best-selling author, Elaine. That's you. See, I can hustle for you as well as I can hustle for myself. Elaine's book about suffragettes, The Woman's Hour, got some of the finest reviews I've seen, and I encourage everybody.
You're too kind.
Everybody can read it after they read.
That's right.
Code Name Madeline, please. But yeah, there have been other recent books about other female SOE agents, and frankly, I haven't read them. I've been busy enough with Noor. This young lady has kept me exceedingly busy. Noor, though, is the exception to everything that went on in the SOE, and the exception to everybody who was recruited by the SOE. Yeah, often when it came to men, the SOE would recruit, banking executives and boxers and pimps, because men often are pimps, so I hear. Women didn't come from any of those professions. Often they were secretaries or stenographers. And here comes Noor, spiritual, as you said, ethereal, as I write. Nobody in the SOE compared to her. None of these other female agents who have had books written about them are anything like Noor. She is sui generis. And I respect that, and I admire that. And sure, the other women, I'm certain, all had an inordinate amount of courage, as did Noor. But courage without the sort of spirituality and without this religious foundation that Noor did is unique, and it's important, and especially if you're going to be an agent, especially if you're going to be confronting Germans during the Second World War. Noor did all of this because it emanated from her faith, her soul, her heart. And speaking about her heart, if I may, just for a second, my favorite quote from Noor, we were talking about surprises, my favorite quote from Noor came in an 18-page essay that her nephew David, who lives in southern Germany, sent to me one day. I didn't know what to make of this. Part of it was about world religions. Part of it was about the meditation that's required when you shoot a pistol, which was extraordinary. People ordinarily didn't talk about that. But she also said, the real comes forth when the heart is broken. And I'm convinced World War II broke Noor's heart. She knew what the Nazis were like. She knew what they were doing to the Jews and other minorities and countries they conquered. That broke Noor's heart, and that brought the real forth in her.
What do you think Noor's message is for readers and thinkers today? Because she doesn't just live a brave secret agent's life. As you say, she has a whole philosophy, a way of approaching life, a way of approaching death. What do you think she can tell us in this time when it's not easy to find heroines or heroes?
Thank you, because I believe deeply that Noor is intensely relevant to our time. These are not the times I bargained for. And those were not the times Noor bargained for. Noor's father said, and I'm about to paraphrase, that the essence of spirituality is caring for the person next to you. It's not being distant from them. It's not meditating on a mountaintop. It's not lighting incense and sitting on a zafu pillow, a meditation pillow. It's being in this world. That, to me, is what we can learn from Noor. Be in this world. Doesn't mean you have to be spiritual about it, but it does mean, as Noor knew, to embrace truth. And right now we live in an age of excessive mendacity. I'm being extraordinarily nonpartisan. I'm not attributing anything.
That's just a prevailing truth that you don't have to explain.
Okay, I'm being more disciplined than I usually am. Embrace truth. Know truth. Speak truth. Be courageous. Care for those next to us. Nor did, we should. Noor's father wrote these codes for his chivalry. He said, keep your ideals high in all circumstances. Too often today, we let our ideals lag. We can't. Noor's father said duty was as sacred as religion. Whether you are an atheist, an agnostic, or you are steeped in religion, please observe your duty, and your duty is, of course, to yourself, to keep yourself intact, it's also to others. And he said, do not spare yourself in the work which you must accomplish. We all have work to accomplish, but if you're lazy about it, if you compromise yourself in the course of it, you are not fulfilling the rightness of that work, and you're not being true to yourself and to your goals.
Yeah, at one point, I think you describe it, and I remember this phrase, you said it was a mysticism of messy hands.
Yes.
You know, it was, the world is not a perfect, gentle place, and mysticism takes many forms. I think we're going to take, yes, do you want to?
Oh, yeah, I'm being messy, and again, I'm going to paraphrase your father. At one point he said, this is about being human. He said something like, it's easy being an angel. Yeah, you can go to a mountaintop, meditate, be an angel up there. It's difficult and messy being a human, with all the demands on us, with everything else we'd rather be doing, but we still have to meet our duty. And he said, yeah, there will be judgment day, but every day, he said, is a judgment day. Every day we should be aware of that and meet it and confront it and reward it and reward ourselves. Yes,
well, that's what's so amazing about the book, is that you have all these spiritual and mystical underpinnings and aphorisms for life. And on the front story is this gangbusters, you know, spy story. So you've got a lot to chew on. I think we're gonna, I'm gonna pose some questions to you from the audience. We have some really good ones. Here is one for you, Arthur. I've heard that one of the pitfalls of extensive research can be getting almost too much information. Yes, I can attest to that one too. And you're always going down interesting rabbit holes. Is there any favorite bit of research that didn't quite make it into the book for one reason or another? That's a great question.
Or 3 reasons or 4 reasons, yes. I have another book lying around my place. I discarded so much. Okay, Elaine, you've read the book. You may remember very, very brief references I have to these Buddhist stories that Noor translated. Yeah. These Jataka tales.
Yeah, the animal stories.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the Jatakas, these are traditional Buddhist stories, basically about Buddha's hundreds of reincarnations. Every reincarnation, Buddha's a different animal, and that animal somehow sacrifices himself to help others, just like Noor sacrificed herself to help others. And in 1939, in fact, Noor translated and published a book of 20 Jataka tales. Well, knowing nothing about Jatakas, I translated the dickens out of them, and I wrote 16 pages about the Jatakas. Who wants to read 16 pages about the Jatakas? Even
what editors are for?
They were brilliantly written, I assure you. My editor said, cut it down. There might be a page and a half, 2 pages about the Jatakas and what they represent. So yes, I went down a Buddhist rabbit hole with the Jatakas, and I got myself out.
Yep, that's the important part. Here's another question for you. I've heard that one of the pitfalls of extensive research can be getting almost, oh wait, we just had that. Here's another one. I'm sorry, it was here twice. Here's another question. After writing a book and being so close to the lives of real people, do you find that you miss them after you finish writing?
I'm gonna hedge sometimes. I've written a book about Louis Farrakhan, leader of the Nation of Islam. I don't miss them. I wrote a book. I wrote a book about a New Jersey rabbi who hired a hitman to kill his wife. He was convicted, spending the rest of his life in prison. I do not miss Fred Newlander. I wrote a book about a very, very successful stage mentalist, Jewish fellow who got much too close to some of the top Nazis in Berlin in the early 1930s. I don't miss Eric Jan Hannesson. I miss Noor. Many of the reasons that I accounted before. She's a very different, very positive, very extraordinary person. And if we all lived our lives, or at least if I lived my life by the standards that Noor set of courage and decency and selflessness and service, it would be a much better world. Other guys I wrote about did not create a better world. The world worked for one, and she died for one.
Yeah. Well, we have, I think, one last question, and it's a good one. What are you reading at the moment, if you're able to read, and who are some of your favorite authors?
One of my favorite authors is Elaine, but
Right.
what am I reading? Yeah, believe me, this is a unique time for me because I do have a little bit of leisure. Number of years ago, I became infatuated with P.G. Wodehouse, wonderful British humorist. He wrote about 70, 80 novels. I have no idea how he was so prolific. So a couple of days ago, I started a new Wodehouse. I think it's called The Code of the Boosters. The code in that is very different than the chivalry code that Noor's father wrote about. And of course, every week another New Yorker comes, another New York review of books. Every morning I read the New York Times.
Okay. Well, I think our time is pretty much up, visiting lovely Portland, Maine, where I think we both would like to be right now. And I'm going to ask if you have anything else you want to tell your potential readers and our audience.
Okay, one or two really quick things. I know it's late, and I failed to show these. I think people would benefit by seeing some of these photos.
Okay.
Because aesthetically, visually, this was an extraordinary family. Okay, this is Noor's mother, Ora Baker. She's American. She was in Arizona, lived with her brother in New York City, and in New York, met Noor's father, Noor Inayat Khan. He was teaching at a yoga mystical type of school that Noor's mother, Ora, was running. The two of them eloped to Europe. Noor was born in Russia, then the family settled out in Paris eventually. I hope that's showing up.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. And this is Noor, probably in her mid to late 20s.
Wow.
And I made 3 trips to Suran, where the family lived. There's a lovely house there. This is what it looked like in the 1920s. It's almost a palace or a castle. And on my first visit there, this will be the last from me, please stay with us, everybody. My first visit there, somebody had given me essentially a Muslim prayer to say or leave what I thought was appropriate. This was the first verse of the Quran, which is traditionally said over the dead. I didn't know where to say it. I didn't know what to do with it. While I was in that home that the family had lived in for years in Suren, I entered this room. And this is where Noor and her brother had a long discussion. In June 1943, they decided to leave France, go to England, eventually, if all went well, come back to France. Now, I'm not the kind of fellow who falls on his knees, but I pulled that prayer out of my backpack, and I fell on my knees in front of a photograph. I started that verse.
Wow.
So
Very special.
unexpected things have happened with this.
Yeah. Yeah. What a journey. Well, thank you, Arthur, and good luck on the journey of Codename Madeline. And it'll take you more fascinating places. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to Print Bookstore. And hope we both get to visit you in person sometime soon. So
Yes, that would be fun.
thanks a lot, Arthur. Take care.
Good night, Portland, and I will see you, Elaine.
Right. Bye-bye.